Everybody, welcome back to the Brian and Pete podcast. It's good to see you, Pete. I'm glad to spend the morning here chatting with you.
Hey, good to see you, Brian. Yeah, and hi everyone who's joining us. Again, I was in a coffee shop this week, Brian, and as I was leaving the coffee shop, an assistant pastor at another church said, "Hey, Pete, how you doing?" So we had a wee chat, and he said, "By the way, I'm listening to the Brian and Pete podcast." I said, "Wow, are you? That's incredible." So,
Oh,
uh,
that's cool.
yeah, I'm constantly humbled by people who are listening in and are finding it helpful. So, well done, you, Brian, for instigating it. It's great, and
Oh,
it's good fun.
yeah. I keep hearing people in my church like, "Who is this amazing Pete guy out there? Like, who is this
Uh,
guy?" Oh, it's fun. It's fun to hear good feedback from everybody. Love the emails that come in for Brian and Pete podcast at gmail.com. And yeah, just even the encouraging texts and stuff that we receive. Thank you, everybody.
mm.
All right, let's
What are we
talk
talking
about
about today, Brian?
stretching seasons. Let's talk about stretch. I
Okay.
don't know if you've ever had any
I don't know
stretching
what are you
seasons.
talking about.
I know, like what I mean by stretching
Yeah,
seasons.
define it for us.
Stretching seasons are those times when you're operating at the edge of your capacity,
Right.
at the
Yeah.
edge of your capacity, either emotionally or mentally or spiritually or
Mhm.
physically, sometimes by choice, sometimes not by choice. So, for example, family crisis or health crisis might be a not by choice season. Other times, most of mine are kind of my own making, I think, where I have too much in my schedule. Whose fault is that? Brian Ingram's and Jesus. So, kind of depending on, and or just, yeah, just intense seasons of just taking on maybe too much on the side or whatever. But so seasons when we're operating on the edge of our capacity.
Brilliant. Okay. No, that's a great theme. And you know, as you're introducing the theme, let me give you an analogy because
Yeah.
I think this analogy might kind of frame how we think about it. So I've got a jumper on just now. So it's like a jumper. You stretch it, you stretch it, you stretch it, and then you let it go, and it doesn't totally go back to the size it was.
Mm,
Um, it's permanently changed slightly,
yeah.
and I think I'm talking about the benefit here of a stretching season. So if you stretch it too much, it rips.
Yeah.
But if you stretch it just the appropriate amount and then let it go, it's a different shape from what it was before. And I think that can happen as an individual, that
Mm,
we're changed as we stretch,
yeah.
or I think it can happen as a church. You know, over the years, I've thought of moments where, I mean, you talked about your Easter Sunday attendance, Brian, breaking the 1,000 mark, which is amazing.
Mm,
But
mm,
hey, your
yeah.
church stretched and you
Hmm.
let it go. It will
Hmm.
go back down, but the thing is, it might not go back down to what it was. And I always think it's good for a church, for example, hey, have a Sunday where you double your attendance. You know, have a
Mm,
Sunday like that and plan a few of them through the year. And then, and sure, just in other words, let people see what the next level looks like. And then you stretch it and you let it go. And it goes back a bit, but it never goes back to totally the same shape it was before. And it's constantly, and you just keep doing that, and eventually it changes shape. Anyway, there's a thought. I think stretching is part of growing, but
it's good.
it's a good thing, but it might not always
Stretching.
feel good.
No, it's usually a cause for grumbling or complaining or fear or anxiety or, well, I mean, I honestly though, it does depend on the crisis. Like there are certain really tough seasons that happen, but generally speaking, like what I'm hearing you saying is that it's good, and somehow, like, I see people, maybe they lose their jobs and they're in a season of transition, which is a stretching season.
Hmm.
And it is so hard when you don't know where things are going or how things are going to turn out, to be to give in to some of the darker aspects of stretching seasons. But just trying to stay in that place of, man, stretching seasons can be really good. And what's God got for me in this season of stretching, and or what's my heart?
So, Brian, start with some stories.
Yeah,
Do you want to go there first? Why don't you
I
start with a story
I've got
of a
some
time when
basic ones. I got some, yeah,
you were
sure.
stretched?
Okay, well, one of my own sort of making, in March, and the own sort of making ones. I mean, I have to take a little bit of blame for it, but I knew March was going to be a big month. I had some extra teaching going on, more than normal, more than normal. And so that when I have extra teaching on, I mean, I don't know how you do it. You seem to teach like 12 times a week and make it look easy and flawless. But when I have extra teaching, it really it it it's stretching.
Mm.
At the same time, my son, we were going to redo his whole bathroom. We're going to gut the whole thing, and so I had this a double challenge going on, where more stretching at when it comes to ministry, and then in my free time, quote unquote free time, the rest time probably, I'm there doing plumbing or just like tiling or all the things going on
If you
there.
need a
And
plumber, email Brian and Pete podcast at
yeah,
gmail.com.
yeah, Pastor Joiner, Tyler. Yeah, so we've got the a double challenge, and I know personally that when I am not guarding my Sabbath days
Mm.
well, or I'm filling them up, then it really multiplies the issues when it comes to this. And so I try really hard to avoid that. But here during that month, on Saturdays, I'm out there with my son, and we're having a great time. I'm trying to go to Taco Bell as much as possible for for just for fun. It's by his place, and so we're going for it. But I can feel myself
Mm.
stretching, and the more that I'm stretching, the more I have to battle the fears, anxieties, and the challenges. It was physically challenging. I was sore. I was, from um, bending and carrying things that I'm not used to doing. I mean, I type and I talk. That's not a lot of stretching and bending. But that month was really pushing. But part of the benefit of it is I had an incredible quality time with my son,
Mm-hmm.
and that was so special. And I mean, I was helped. I was helped by God in all the extra teaching times, which we can talk about later. But that's a recent one. You got a recent one?
Well, I'm thinking about probably I'm actually not thinking recent. I'm thinking right back to when I was a
Sure.
teenager. So when
Yeah.
I was between 17 years old and 19 years old, I was a new Christian,
Hmm.
and my mum was diagnosed with cancer. And
Wow.
when I was 19, she died.
Yeah.
And wow,
Yeah.
I just remember I felt stretched beyond my capacity.
Mhm.
I felt life had, it was a really, really intense 2 years. And it was 2 years of, we responded in faith, not fear. So it was 2 years of, when mum was diagnosed, it was beyond help from the beginning. So she figured, well, I'm just going to, I have no option. I have to we'll just trust the Lord. So
Mhm.
she just kept, she was a teacher. She just kept teaching. She missed one week as an art teacher. She missed 1 week. Missed one
Wow.
Sunday at church.
Wow.
And then the Sunday she wasn't there, she entered heaven. So she had this incredible, I would say miraculous 2 years, but she died.
Yeah.
And we had periods of prayer and fasting. We had worship times as a family. So I'd get my guitar out, and my mum and dad would worship together. It was a intense, stretching 2 years, heartbreaking 2 years.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, I lost my mum. I lost my mum. I was 19. And she's not been part of my life. So, it's like the jumper analogy of being stretched. I was never the same after that.
Yeah.
In a bad way, no. I think in a good way. I was,
Mm.
and I think because we responded positive to the Lord through it, because I think people can be stretched and they can come out bitter after it.
Mhm.
It'd be very
Yeah.
easy. Like Joseph went through a stretching period emotionally, but he somehow came out better, not bitter. And I think a large part of that was he chose to forgive, and his brothers weren't hard. He wasn't carrying bitterness. So I think people could go through something like what I've described and
Yeah.
quite understandably and easily become bitter against life, maybe even against God.
Yeah.
But because we responded in faith, I came out changed.
Mm.
And I do think I can't give you. Pete, why did that happen? I don't have an
Yeah.
answer for that, but I
Yeah.
do know, as a couple of years after that, when I was 21, I went to plant the church.
Mhm.
I had an empathy for people,
Yeah.
I had an understanding of suffering as well as a faith for healing.
Yeah.
And that was a dynamic as well. But yeah, so that was undoubtedly a stretching season.
Wow.
One that wasn't enjoyable,
No.
but but did God change me through it? Did He deepen me? I think yes, He did. Yeah,
Yeah. Wow.
yeah.
I'm
So
not following that. You're gonna have to come up with something a little bit lighter.
okay, okay.
That
So
was,
so
man, that's huge.
yeah, it's a
Thank you.
really massive, and people
Yeah.
will be able to relate to that. So
Yeah. Well,
it's the inescapableness of it, because
yeah.
it's
Yeah.
when there's something like that, you can't. It's not like you can just say, right, I'm just gonna get away from it all, because you can't.
Hmm.
It's in your head. You can't. It's your mum. You can't get away
Yeah.
from it,
Yeah.
and it's very very hard. And some people are probably listening are going through something similar,
Yeah.
and yeah, yeah. So
Wow.
we're changed through stretching,
Yeah.
and more recently, um, my life is the I guess you could say the increased demands, but it's all by this is by that wasn't by choice,
Yeah.
that was imposed upon me.
Yes.
But actually the life I'm living now is by choice, and
I don't know
actually
how you do it. I
but
don't
it
know how
is
you do it.
but it's stretching.
Yeah.
it's well it's all to do with conviction. So
Hmm.
I'm carrying, I guess, three remits: the
Hmm.
local church,
Yeah.
this apostolic family, and the unity movement among churches in Scotland.
Yeah.
But it's each one of them. It's a sense of a call to three,
Hmm.
and it's self-imposed. I chose that, but in one sense, it's not self-imposed. That the Lord stirred this in me, and all I know is that He gives you the grace for what you're in.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the busyness, and I've got the team around me.
Yes.
I've got really good people
Yeah.
who are better than me at so many aspects of leadership, and I'm truly grateful for a team around me. So when
Hmm.
you go through your stretching season, make sure you've got people around you. But then there's a grace for the season you're in. And I
Hmm.
think for everyone, no matter whether that season's to do with you're carrying heavy weight organizationally, or whether it's you're facing the crisis of your life, like I've just described,
Yeah.
actually, I think there's a grace for that
Yeah.
season. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure you have other seasons where you have a few staff turning over at the same time. And so then, like, one aspect of your roles just becomes so much harder, and stretching in that, or you see people around you that are struggling, and you're trying to kind of help and carry, but there's only so much you can that you can do with all the other things going on. Yeah, I mean, obviously, stretching seasons are stretching, and I like what you say about the choices between sometimes people going dark when it comes to those seasons. You mentioned Joseph, but I think about his dad all the time, Jacob, and how
Right.
when Jacob
Wow.
loses Joseph, he shows very toxic symptoms of grief. I mean, grief is good, but like
That's a good
you're
point.
you're like 17 years. His response to his son Benjamin, and not letting him, going and still accusing those sons of
Mm.
of the stuff, like seven, well, or not 17, 13 maybe years later, or whatever it was. Like some real, like, it seemed like Jacob just really didn't recover from the Joseph thing for a long time, and went pretty dark for those years, and then was revived when he finds out about Joseph. But
That's a really good point. Yes, a very good point. Because often people focus on Joseph,
yeah,
who came out better, not bitter. But it feels like Jacob, he ended up bitter, not better.
yeah,
Wow,
toxic.
that's a
Yeah,
very very important point, Brian. Well done.
yeah. So
Gee.
yeah, when you're being stretched, like, and when I'm being stretched, like, let's say in some of the like ways that I'd say several times a year I go through a stretching season. Hopefully not a big one, but a month or two where I'm like, okay, this is more intense than I prefer. Like, this is more stretching than I prefer. Um, when you see that, what are some of the symptoms that you notice in yourself, when you're flags, maybe when you're going into when you're feeling stretched?
So, as you're being stretched, as humans, when you haven't got basically you haven't got as much margin. It's like a computer hard disk, right?
Yeah.
If your computer hard disk's 50% full, it's flowing, It's
Yeah.
dealing with tasks. It's everything's cool. But
Yeah.
if your computer hard disk gets to like 97% full, it's like the wee spinning pizza of doom appears on your screen,
Yeah. Oh, pizza.
and
I like that. Yeah.
everything's taking a bit longer.
Hmm.
You have to do the restarts, and you think, how on earth? So, and I think that's what it's like in life. Is when we've got that margin,
Hmm.
everything, you can handle the unexpected big
Yeah.
things, but then when you've already diminished your margin, you haven't got much to play with.
Yeah.
That it could be in your time or in your emotion. It's your time and emotions are quite full.
Yeah.
Then what can happen is anything extra comes on, you can find either you react in a way that's not the fruit of the spirit. You can react with frustration, or you can react internally with anxiety. I find,
Hmm.
the anxious moments come when I don't have much margin anyway.
Yeah.
I'm trying to cope with juggling enough things, and then, oh man, this has come on top of it, and you don't have the headspace for it, and then that's when stress comes. And I think you made a point earlier about not missing your Sabbath. Now, obviously, we talked about tithing last week, a couple of weeks ago, and we talked about how we're not Jews, so it's no
Hmm.
longer for us a law to obey. And I see the same with Sabbath. I think Sabbath is a brilliant principle, but
Hmm.
not it's not necessarily, well, definitely not to be seen as a law anymore because we're no longer the law. But is it a great principle?
Hmm.
Absolutely. And when you've got the stretching seasons, somehow to if you can make sure you're carving out the time with the Lord every day
Hmm.
and your time to switch off every week,
Yeah.
I think that makes the stretching season, doesn't matter how stretched you are,
Yeah.
don't miss your time with prayer and in the Word with the Lord every day, and don't miss a day off in a week. And do you know what? When you're so stretched, to take a day off in the week, you think, I don't have the time to take a day off in the week.
Yeah.
And yet, it's again, it goes back to the tithing conversation.
Yeah.
It's almost like when you understand, hey, as we release to the Lord, who benefits? I mean, the Lord's blessed, I'm sure, but boy, oh boy, I've seen the blessing coming back, and it's almost like you can't afford not to tithe. you,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
90% goes so much further than the 100% ever could have, and yet I think it's the same with the weeks of the days of the week. I think your 6 days, the productivity and the fruit of your life in the 6 days. When you take that extra day, so the extra day for me, that day off, it's like a step of faith.
Hmm.
God, I'm going to trust you to run the world.
Yeah.
And you're looking at your schedule like, do I have time for a day off? Yeah, you got to.
Yeah.
God did. He was busier than you.
Yeah. No, that ranks up as one of the biggest mistakes that I'm prone to making. Skipping the rest day, the God day.
Right. Yeah.
And I it's as predictable as can be. If I am skipping one God rest day a week, I feel it the next week. If I'm skipping a few in a row because of some project going on, maybe a church renovation thing, or I don't know, I've done things I've done in the past, I become quite internally miserable.
Yeah.
Without that recharge. Some people can do it, I can't do it. And I'm just amen to that. That has been one of the biggest
Mm-hmm.
mistakes that I've been prone to making, just ignoring the rest day, even in short term. And again, the Jesus time. Like when you're in stretching seasons, like I need to lead my heart with Jesus, because when I'm feeling stretched, I'm feeling like, oh no, I'm not going to make it, or I'm going to do a terrible job, or I've got the speaking thing coming up and I don't have enough time, and I'm going to be embarrassed, and it's going to be awful, and I'm going to say something that my that won't go well. Or I was gonna say that my wife would give me feedback on, but like she's great, but just it's like it's like all these like fears or anxieties, but I've got to keep getting my Jesus times right, and during stressful seasons or stretching seasons. Yeah, that Jesus time is, again, continues to be an anchor, and it is the mistake of mistakes to abdicate that time.
Yeah. I
It's like,
agree.
why would I let go of the anchor in the storm moment,
Mm-hmm.
the resetting moment? Yeah, that's good. I also think it's a mistake that I tend to make is in when I'm feeling the stretching to lose a thankful, grateful perspective.
Mm.
Like, so maybe my stretching is coming from a season of extra speaking opportunities. And that's awesome that God has like opened up some opportunities to maybe speak or teach at different environments. And yeah, they're not normal. And, I still get a little like, I don't know. I don't want to say anxious, but that's the right word. I'm trying to come up with a different word that doesn't sound so weak, but
Nervous.
nervous. Yeah. But like, it's just a different environment.
I
And
get nervous every time I preach.
do you
Yeah.
really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Not as in panicky anxious,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
like, oh Lord, help.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm feeling that. I'm feeling that when it comes to different environments, and yet I try and combat that with two things. I try and combat that with just thankful and grateful, not losing that perspective. God, I'm thankful for this opportunity that you've given me,
Mhm.
as opposed to I'm stressed that I won't do a good enough job.
Mhm.
And then the other thing I've learned this, even just this last year, as I've really worked to try and overcome panic and anxiety, as I think I've mentioned that before, uh, like when I'm looking ahead to a speaking moment that is potentially weighing on me, and especially if it's combined with being away overnight,
Mhm.
which is part of that historical trigger, I might feel the anxiety creeping up, and I will laugh. I will attempt to laugh, and even a complete fake laugh that does not come from my heart. Uh,
That's so good.
like so something like that is so disingenuous with how I'm feeling. I've been like, whoa,
So you get your
that
diary out and say, ha ha ha.
no, I,
and
I
you,
don't laugh in misery. But
no, but you look at what's coming, like, wow, here we go.
it's like I might be walking along. I feel a spike of anxiety or
Okay.
or overwhelmingness,
Yeah.
and I'll laugh and I'll try and bring it back to gratitude. God, thank you for this opportunity, and I'm not gonna let. Uh, I think I wasted so many years of my early ministry life being miserable in seasons where God was giving me such great things, but I wasn't responding with thankfulness. I was responding with the stretching and the overwhelm. I was lost in the stretching of the dark feelings because it was hard,
Mm.
and it was uncertain, and it was overwhelming, and I was like, I just don't want to do that again. If God is in the process of doing something good for me, I want to embrace it as a good thing.
Mm.
And even though it feels difficult now, I'm not saying all stretching seasons are good and wonderful, but most of the ones that I go through in a yearly realm are good stretching, even if they're not fun stretching.
Mm.
And so just try and keep the perspective of thankfulness when it comes to those stretching ministry opportunities.
Let me share a thought, Brian. So
Yeah.
I think stretching is also a leadership technique, not just for yourself, but for those you're leading.
Mm-hmm.
So you look at Jesus with the disciples,
Yeah.
and do you not think? I mean, I think he was constantly exposing them to being stretched.
Sure.
He would stretch their thinking
Yeah.
by saying things that just blew their mind.
Yeah.
You have heard that it says, but I say unto you, and he said in King James English. you know,
Yeah.
he would turn the kingdom's ways were so different to the world's, and he was so stretching their thinking. And then he was stretching them in terms of seeing the miraculous, but then he was stretching them and say, okay, now you give them something to eat, or he sent them out in twos to heal the sick. You think we can't do that? I said,
Yeah.
no, you will. Just do it.
Yeah.
Just do it. And so they were constantly being stretched. And actually, I think as leaders, and then I think that the apostles then went, and that's how they led others. And I think one of the so I'm thinking back to when I was 21, and I'm looking at when I started the church as a 21-year-old. I wasn't qualified. I didn't feel qualified. We didn't have it. No one. It was just me and my wife. Wasn't like a team of us started. It was just me and my wife. We didn't have financial backing. We just started by faith, and it was the dynamic of that stretched you. So it's actually putting yourself in the position where you have to trust in the Lord stretches people, and I think I think that's a good dynamic for. So I'm thinking, okay, when I'm finding a church member that's got a good heart, I'm thinking, how can I see you grow? So I'm thinking, could you become a small group leader?
Mm-hmm.
And they've never seen themselves as a leader; they've always seen themselves as a member. But now that it's like, wow, they stretch. It's like the jumper stretches, and they're changed. Or you've a member of the band. Could you lead worship next week? And they've gone from being a band member to being a worship leader. It's just that those stretch moments, and I think we can keep increasing people's capacity. So I have this as a philosophy of ministry. Constantly, I guess you get another way of saying it is you're constantly taking risks with people, and
Yeah.
what that does is it gets them out of their comfort zone, it stretches them, and then you're constantly growing individuals.
I came across something recently. I can't remember where it was. Maybe we talked about it or I read it somewhere, or, I do read sometimes, but about eldership and about selecting elders. Was that us or, and
Could be.
the thing that it was saying was that when you're looking for elders, often you want to look for the busiest people
All right.
as opposed to the people with lots of spare time. And and I was thinking, oh, are all my so many of my elders are so busy when it comes to their life and their professional work, but those are people who know how to live a stretched life,
Mm-hmm.
and they've been stretched by so many things over, and so that they're more comfortable with being stretched, and they have gone through the process of being, yeah, stretched. So I was like, oh, so I'm hearing what you're saying here. I'm like, oh yeah, that's also connected to the why it's a good idea to look for people whose lives has stretched them,
Mm.
interesting things to them. I don't know. It's just a thought that as
It's a
we
good
were
thought.
talking.
No,
Yeah,
but I do think it's a good. I think it's an important leadership
yeah,
dynamic to raise up others.
yeah,
Yeah, it's like in the gym. You put the weight on, and it's
yeah,
when the weight is on that the muscle grows. It's not when you're looking at the weights or you're
yeah,
thinking about the weights. It's when you
yeah,
actually take the weight. So when you give that person a small group or
yeah,
encourage that person to plan that missions trip or you know.
yeah. So these are all the good thoughts, but I'll have to be honest with you, Pete. Sometimes in my stretching seasons, I don't make it.
Mm,
So when and what happens to me when I'm like, I've been going through a stretching season and I'm just like feeling the overwhelm. It's like I just completely, I call it nine, but like I just completely just give up for a day,
mm,
or a couple of days. Like I can't do anything. It's just like I can't be bothered. I just can't be bothered
mhm,
and I mean this. I don't know how often this happens. Maybe 3 times in 5 years.
mhm,
It's not like a very common thing, but where I get to a moment where I'm just, it's just all built up too much, and even my normal practices to kind of safeguard me, I just kind of collapse, and maybe I want to escape into a book and just be like, I have so much going on, but just want to read a book, uh, a fiction book, a non helpful book, of some sort, and I can see it probably cyclically every autumn. I have a nudge to read a book, and I try and avoid that because I just kind of get swept away mentally, and I got a lot going on up here when it comes to teaching, and I don't have space to fill it with a lot of fiction stuff. But just that escape thing, and I know other people when they get under stress, they maybe they get like hyper controlling. That's not really my thing. Other people they want to withdraw from everybody, or other people like just people lean into relationships. I know that I just kind of implode. I just stop doing what I know I just need to keep going, but I
mm.
just can't keep going anymore when I kind of get to that point. Oh, do you ever get to a point where you're like, I've been stretched and I'm not Captain Awesome at this moment. I mean, you're probably always, but I'm not. I get to those points every once in a while.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, completely. And it's either there's been times where either I do something like you're saying, like read a book, but for me it wouldn't be reading a book. It would be let's just sit and watch a Netflix series,
Oh
or
yeah, sure.
I just need to switch off from this. And
Yeah.
actually, that's quite a relief. Me and Ange like
Yeah.
watching a cool series or something.
Yeah.
So that's an escape, and you've got to have a bit of that in your life because you just
Mhm.
to be thinking on the thing all the time is just.
Yeah.
But then there's also times where I found myself in a season of intense stretching. And again, this wouldn't be every month. It might be a couple of times in the year where you're actually in a, almost, would despair be the word? You're feeling despairing because it's you're usually you're doing fine with everything, but then sometimes it's like, oh, this has all got a bit much here.
Yeah.
If we're honest, and so what I'll do is hey, I'm just going out for a walk, and I'm right on the edge of the Pentland Hills here, so I'll just get my hiking boots on and just walk, and just talk it through, with God, and just walk and walk and walk and resolve it, and then come back, an hour, a couple of hours later, and it feels like the perspective's a bit better. But absolutely, we're humans, and that moment of what you can use. You're usually coping. You're having to juggle, or this, either it's imposed upon you or it's a life you've chosen. But either way, you're coping with it, and then sometimes it's just multiple factors build up, and you have to I just need to resolve this or talk this through. And do you know what I find so helpful, Ryan? If you look at, thank God for the Psalms, because there's a guy who was stretched. Obviously huge number of them are written by David, and David was constantly being stretched, stretched by the opinions of others, stretched by beyond his ability to cope so many times. And yet you see his prayer life just in the raw, in the book of Psalms, in the collection of Psalms. You're just seeing his praying, and you can see he's processing, God, this is beyond what I can cope with here, but lead me to the rock that is higher than I. And and he kept coming to God who was bigger. And even in Paul, I love the rawness of Paul. He says, we were under so much pressure, far beyond our ability to cope. And we felt we had received the death sentence. What wording! So Paul was saying that the pressures, and it's in another place he says, fears on the outside. Sorry, conflicts on the outside, fears within. So Paul was so honest about, because you see the Apostle Paul and his courage to go from place to place to place. But then you read his writings and you think, wow, he understood what it was to have fear and paranoia as a human being, and he felt the conflicts outside. He wasn't immune to it. It didn't just bounce off him. It went deep. It hurt him. He found it hard. He found the abandonment of people tough. You see that in his letters. When everyone else abandoned me, but the Lord stood by my side. So there's a reality check too. There's no superhuman people here. But what you find with Paul and with David is, it says, but God who raises the dead comforted us. And David constantly in the Psalms kept coming to the rock that was higher than him. And so it's constantly, who is it said? It depends where the pressure is. Is the pressure behind you pushing you to God, or is the pressure in front of you pushing you away from God? Can you remember that quote?
No.
Okay. It was maybe Augustine or someone like that. It talks about how it all depends where the pressure lies. If the pressure's, when you're in that moment of pressure, is it pushing you to God like David and like Paul? Or is that pressure getting in the way of you connecting with God? And that's when it's toxic. That's when it's bad.
Yeah. Wow. I think you've set us up there with, I wrote this down, expect 15 listener questions with Netflix series suggestions. That's sweet. I think a lot of the things that you've probably picked up on as well over the years, because we've had so many stretching seasons, is kind of some preemptive things in our lives that we do to help us mitigate or prepare or be ready for stretching seasons. Simple things, maybe for example, like I think a lot of people do this. They're strategic about their time off. And they're like, okay, I'm going to make sure that I take time off in these seasons. I used to always crash in the end of May, like beginning of June, at like basically that weekend. It's like I could push myself through from January, and then I wouldn't quite make it to summer. And so it's like, okay, I need to shift my schedule. I need to put something in here for sustaining, that kind of preemptive thing. I try and schedule my work week
Mm-hmm.
so that I run at 80% of capacity,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that other things come up, so that when other things come up, it doesn't put me to 120%. It puts me just up to that. And then, but trust me, I got things for the other 20%.
It fills.
Yeah, it feels. But like, what kind of things do you do to kind of be preemptive? Obviously, health and exercise. Some of the listeners have asked about um, the role of health and being mindful of just health and just being healthy
Mm-hmm.
as leaders, or at least being intentional about that and exercise and stuff. I think that we're both mindful of that. But what sort of preemptive things do you also, any of those ideas resonate with you, or other things that you're like, yeah, I kind of try and I know my rhythms, I know circumstances, and I know that stretching seasons will come, and they're only seasons. We're not talking like they may feel like they're forever, but they're only seasons. So we can keep that in mind. But
Yeah, I
other
mean,
things
what you've commented on preempting by having a, you recognize at this point in the year I'm going
yeah,
to feel it, so have a what you know because Angie's a teacher, she has the teaching holidays.
yeah,
So just at the beginning of the year, we just plan for the year. Okay, we're going to be away here, 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 here. So I mean, it's not rocket science. We just plan our holidays,
yeah,
and then we talk. We sometimes we just book. We look for okay, where's there cheap flights to a city, and we'll
hmm,
plan a city break. And just if you know, okay, we've got a city break coming up, and it's even if it's a few months away, you've got a thing in your back of your mind. You're busy
yeah,
with things, and you think, all right, but we're looking forward to this.
yeah,
And so just a few things like that through the year where you think, oh, we're going to go up to the Highlands, or we're going to visit Poland, or you've just got a few things planned that
yeah,
just make it a little bit more sustainable. So, and fun as well is really important in the middle of it. So
yeah,
just if you have a day that's just intense, 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 and there's no little moments of just a bit of fun, it feels like all right. It doesn't feel. I for me, I need a little bit of fun in the day. That's why
hmm,
I do this podcast, right? So hey,
okay.
this is my fun moment. I've had my fun moment for the day. This is
This is fun, talking about stressful seasons
it.
or stretching seasons.
Yeah,
Yeah, I have a motto: never underestimate the power of play.
yeah,
And in friendships and relationships and team dynamics and church dynamics and just personally, like I just yeah, having fun. I'm a big fan.
yeah. Totally,
Yeah.
totally. So what do you do? What's your preemptive?
No, I'm learning from you. I'm learning from you. No, I mean, I've got my rhythms, I've got my observations, but I'm not great at laying out a year's worth of breaks and holidays. That's probably a growth area. It's like,
That's it. No.
yeah, I tend to just look at seasons and then be like, okay. A lot of my time off though is going back to the States and visiting family
Mm-hmm.
back there, and so I tend to have a bigger chunk in the summer. I have a kind of mini sabbatical this summer where I'm gonna spend time
Great.
at Bible camp where I met Kelly and served at. So I'm really looking forward to that this year, sort of thing. It's gonna be great. Really looking forward to that. But I think I have in my head, maybe for a couple years now, an ideal rhythms. Like, okay, ideally I'll take a break here. Ideally I'll take a break there. I've said it to Kelly. This we should do this. We should do that. Do we? Not yet. We haven't yet locked in those city breaks or quick escapes or whatever. It's been a while since we've done that, but I'm learning. I'm learning. Like it's always great. In fact, it's been a while since Kelly and I went away, and but it still lingers as just such a highlight.
Yeah, you
And
should
when you
plan a
guys were
trip.
in
You should plan a
Poland,
trip. Yeah, we were in
uh,
Poland recently, and but
I
you know
know
what
it
we
was
do is
great.
it doesn't need to be expensive. In
Yeah,
fact, it was cheaper living in Poland than it was living here because
yeah,
the food was so cheap. It was great, and the food was great.
yeah.
And no, we what we do is the key is you find when the flights are just released from EasyJet or from Ryanair,
Hmm.
and you get the first release of the flights because that's when they're usually cheaper, and
Yeah.
then you've got something in the diary. You look so it doesn't need to be expensive, but it's good. It's good fun. But you know, also, Brian, I used to enjoy fishing. I mean, I still do enjoy fishing, but the reality is I had a fishing membership. Malcolm Rounds, good
Yes,
friend of
Malcolm.
ours.
Yeah.
He's a great pastor, now retired in our nation. I think Malcolm listens into the podcast. Hi, Malcolm.
Hi, Malcolm.
And but Malcolm got me on the waiting list for membership where he fishes just on the edge of Edinburgh, and it's a great place to fish. Beautiful setting. And every week on the day off, I'd go and fish there. But honestly, just in the last 3.5 years, I wasn't able to go. So I was paying for this membership, and I literally wasn't able to get even a moment to go fishing. That's how crazy the last 3.5 years have been.
Yeah.
I just haven't had a chance to go fishing. So I cancelled the membership because I thought this is just, I'm taking up someone else's space.
Don't tell Malcolm. Don't tell Malcolm.
Don't tell Malcolm. Oh no, he's probably heard now. No, he knows.
Yeah.
But it's just been. So there are seasons where actually, despite wanting to have things that are relief moments in, they just go. So.
Yeah, I suppose when it comes to stretching seasons, I want you to know, like, they're survivable. They're survivable, and sometimes they don't feel like they're going to be. And I think that, I mean, the enemy wants to try and he looks for opportune moments when it comes to, we see that in the temptation of Jesus, and Jesus navigates that, and then he leaves for an opportune time, and I just feel like when we are weaker, and maybe we've made decisions, or maybe we're just in a stretching season, I think those are the times where I just need to be most alert to what is the mindset the enemy wants me to have, or then just where I'm at, and I want to be against that. I want to not partner with that, and I want to keep having a trust mindset, a faith mindset, a hope-filled mindset, and asking myself, who do I need to help me with this moment? I don't know how great I am at that, but like, who do I need to talk to? Who do I need to be clear with about, man, I'm feeling quite overwhelmed. And I was so impacted this year in my Bible reading through all the times that Paul's asking people to pray for him.
It's true.
And I'm like, man, I am not like that as much. I need to imitate Paul's imitating Christ, and I need to start asking people and just being out there, like, I'm being stretched. Would you pray for me? I'm being stretched. Would you pray for me? And it's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of wisdom, and it's just that holy wisdom and of togetherness and carrying each other and praying for each other. And I want to be someone who's quick to pray for people in their stretching seasons.
And I do that with my wife as well. Sometimes I say, Ange, to be honest, I'm feeling it just now. Could you just pray for me? I'm just really feeling the pressures. I'll do that. Craig Denham, who's my wingman on staff with me at Go Global. Yeah. It wouldn't be uncommon for me to say, Craig, I'm feeling the pressures on a number of fronts just now. Can you pray with me? But also, could you help me? Sometimes I'll ask practically, could you help me? Or I'll do the same with my key leads at City on a Hill to say, this is what I'm grappling with just now. Can you pray? So no, I think it's really, really wise.
Yeah.
Really good, Brian.
Oh, by the way, our podcast, months ago, I can't remember when it was, when I was like, yeah, Kelly and I don't pray together or whatever. So apparently my wife listens to this. And so,
Hi, Kelly. Hi, Kelly.
And then she she was away. She was away in Seattle or whatever. And then she got back, and then it just became more of a thing. And I'm like, oh, wow, this is actually pretty great. This idea of praying together. Who knew after 27 years of marriage? So again, thanks for calling that out and encouraging that. It's good. It's good. It's good.
Do you know, I think just you made a comment a few moments ago, which I think is an overriding, very important comment. It made me realize, because I think we are people of faith. We're people of faith. Mm-hmm. Imagine stretching, imagine going through the challenges without having faith. So when I feel stretched financially, I turn and I have a fundamental conviction. The Lord will help you, but I need to talk to him about it. Lord, would you step in, help with this? This is right here. This is the need we've got financially. Please, would you help? In the name of Jesus. Okay, now I trust you. And then somehow I have peace. But you have to labor in prayer. But we're people of faith. Or if you've got a people problem, or one of your team moves on and you need to find someone to fill the gap, Lord, Jesus gave us a prayer. Ask for workers for the harvest field. So we're praying. So, I mean, literally in every area, there's a fundamental undergirding. We trust in the Lord when it's beyond our capacity to cope with our schedule. Lord, help here. I give it all to you. Just if this is a secular podcast and there was no faith ingredient involved, the idea, for example, of becoming better and not bitter, we have a foundation for that. Forgive just as God in Christ forgave you. But if someone doesn't have a foundation for it, what are they left with? Just be positive,
Yeah.
Just think positive thoughts. What's the foundation? What's the basis? And
yet, Pete, I wonder how many Christians functionally operate that way.
Right. Okay.
And they functionally forget that God can be trusted. They functionally aren't thinking about the stretching moments as maybe God opportunity moments, that are functionally living with that sort of mindset.
Yeah. And why would we do that? We have the Word of God.
Yeah.
We have truths. We have a gospel. There's a cross and a resurrection has happened. And that must affect our ability. It has to impact our ability to cope with these things. Can I just, before we kind of go to the listener question, Brian, can I close off with just an ending part of the story about my mum?
Please do, yeah.
Because it changed, for me, it was one of those wow moments in my life. In the last week of Mum's life, when I was 19, I was reading the Bible. And I read in the Old Testament the story of the Shunammite woman whose son had died. And she lay him down in his bed, and she left to go and get the man of God. And her husband said, "Are you okay?" And she had this confession, "It will be well." And she went a little bit further, and then she eventually saw the man of God, and Gehazi, the servant, came and said, "Is everything okay with you, with your family?" And she again repeated the confession, "It will be well." And then the story is that the prophet comes and raises the Shunammite son from the dead. Anyway, I was reading that. It's just in my Bible reading time in the last week of Mum's life. And the verses jumped off the page. And I said to Mum in that last week of her life, "Mum, I was reading this and I really feel this is the word of the Lord for you. I feel God says it will be well." And Brian, it wasn't well. And she died. She died on the Sunday night. And then their funeral was on the Wednesday. But then on the Thursday morning, I got a phone call from my dear friend Tim Brown. He leads one of the Go Global churches in Newcastle. And Tim phoned me and he said, "Pete, last night I had a dream, and in the dream I met your mum, and she told me to tell you that all is well." Wow. I remember as a 19-year-old.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Wow. Now, I wasn't bitter. I had been stretched. There was a lot of unanswered questions. 2 years of intensity had come to an end, and I was missing my mum. Mm-hmm. And then there was this perspective, and it didn't say, by the way, here's why she died, or here's why your prayer for a miracle wasn't answered, or here's what this last two. There was no. It's almost like in the book of Job. There wasn't an explanation, by the way, here's what it was about. It was just, it is well, and probably that's all I needed, really. Wow. And it did. First of all, you're aware, oh boy, there's an eternity. Yeah. Mum's very much alive in the presence of God. Thanks, Lord, for letting me hear that.
Better by far.
Yeah. Yeah. But the perspective, again, having God speaking, having God's word, being able to go to him in prayer, it stops things turning bad. What a difference.
Wow. Thanks for that. Thanks for sharing that. Wow. So, hey, if you have some stressful stretching seasons going on, I hope you find some of these thoughts helpful. We've navigated a lot of varieties of them over the years. And I guess what we're saying is, keep trusting, keep getting the right things right in your life, in your walk with Jesus, in your rhythms, and keep trusting that, if you don't have the time that it takes to do what you need to do, just trust God with the rest. You do what you need to do, but God's with you through it all.
Amen.
Any final words there, Pete, before we go to the listener question?
No. Okay. I think your pastoral comment at the end there is great. Thanks, Brian. And
yeah. Okay, so the listener question, Brian and Pete podcast at gmail.com. Brian and Pete podcast. Great. Send in your listener questions, or, if we run out, we'll just kind of go into, I don't know, questions from Angie or something like that.
Angie and
Uh,
Kelly questions.
Angie and question. Yeah. Okay. So, and it's connected. How often do you assess your priorities and adjust your calendar or job title? Connected to that, in this season, what changes are we making as we adapt to this era's opportunities and challenges? Calendar changes or whatever. So how often do you assess when you look at your challenges and your priorities in a period of time? How often do you kind of assess and pivot?
So because there's so much complexity, because it's multiple organizations for me,
Yeah.
I can't make too many changes too quickly because it has ramifications. Now, it doesn't mean I'm willing to make it. If the Lord says shift, I'll shift, and everyone will just have to catch up with it.
Yeah.
But you can't. It's better to have consistency. So for
Mhm.
me, it's a yearly review moment, and I've amazing PA. Kate is incredible. Kate is
Mhm.
from Mauritius. Um, she is just a real gift and very wise, and she does a lot of juggling act with my calendar. But for her sake, and as she's working with, when I'm going to visit places or speak at conferences, and she's trying to do this complicated juggling act of scheduling my schedule. So for her sake, to actually have rhythms. So for example, these are the Sundays when I'm at City on a Hill, the first and the third week of the month, for example. Um, this is how often I want to meet my key leads, and then this is how often I want to meet my international apostolic leads, and she schedule. You give her the big map,
Mhm.
and she schedules it, and we do that every year. And sometimes I feel, okay, we were a bit imbalanced last year with this, so let's make a shift in this. So it's usually a yearly moment, but
Okay.
for me, you need to have both the courage to change. If you need to change, you have to make the change and have the
Yeah.
courage to mess everything up and making a change. Okay,
Yeah.
we're willing to do that if we need to. But then, as a rule, be consistent. Don't chop and change all the time. Be
Right.
consistent.
Yeah.
Hold your path. Walk the plan, but have the courage to change in the middle of it.
Yeah, I probably assess every, maybe 2 or 3 times a year. A little bit more frequent, especially in this era where there's been a lot of just changes in the ministry and all that's going on. Kind of the kinds of things that I've done over the years in order to make more space in my calendar is I will have, I used to have meetings week and then no meetings week, and that was amazing, where I would have like uh, all my meetings in one week and then no meetings, so that I could do message preps and just all the other things that I wasn't able to get to. That worked well for me for a couple of years, but now I have reduced my number of meetings, and I have meetings days and then non-meetings days, and just so it works. It's working well, but again, it's just kind of like, what's working well, where's the need. The more opportunities I have for speaking in Scotland Bible School, I love Scotland Bible School. It does take a more study and more prep, and but it's not it was such a joy. I love teaching at Scotland Bible School, and just I'm teaching on Job coming up, so I'm just giddy. I finished teaching on Psalms a few weeks ago. Oh, so great. But just what pivots do I need to make, and just kind of making them season by season.
And I think that being proactive with your calendar is
Mhm.
super important.
Yeah.
So, for example, if I was to look at your calendar, Brian, or you to look at my calendar, you should be able to, looking at someone's calendar, say, okay, I think I know what they're called to do.
Hmm.
Does your calendar look like your calling?
Wow.
And actually, I was at a men's retreat speaking at the weekend, and one of the things I said to the guys is that the reason people often don't fulfill their purpose in life is they give all their time to doing secondary things rather than primary things.
Wow. Yeah.
Once you know what you're called to do, then there has to be 2 or 3 key things which, if you achieve, you'll achieve your purpose.
Yeah.
But sometimes our calendars can be dominated with secondary things that aren't those primary things.
Hmm.
And you literally spend all your time doing secondary things rather than the very things that you're meant to do. And so I think it's important for an individual to do an analysis of your calendar. Does my calendar look like my calling? If not, I have to change it this month. Get ahead of it and force your calendar to look like your calling. But also it should be the same for example, for a church. What's your church calendar look like? If you have a mission statement, if you have a purpose for your church, does it manifest in the rhythms in your calendar? If it doesn't, it's just words. It will never become reality. So,
I want to make a comment, but I hope it's well received.
Brace yourself, everyone.
What pastors? As pastors, like I believe that the enemy is always trying to fill up our calendars so that we don't spend enough time preparing for teaching, and I know the pulls in ministry, but I also know the priorities. And when I'm talking to people who that shortcut their preparation, it may work for a Sunday, but I really believe that if you feed people well and you feed them well and prepared and good week after week, I know that there's different philosophies on this. This is my personal philosophy it's huge, big picture. It may not be felt small picture. Hey, I pulled it off this week, but the significance of if you're called to teach, to prepare and to be prepared and to be ready to feed people well. And it should show up in your calendar and be really guarded and protected. That's just my opinion, my humble opinion.
Yeah.
Don't want to throw that out there.
But hey, I'm just thinking of Acts when you're saying that, Brian. Yeah. So it says the apostles were getting involved, very, very hands-on involved with the distribution of food to the widows. Yeah. And a great thing. Good thing. And rightly so. Doesn't it show an apostolic priority? Wow, isn't that brilliant that they... Because for a period they did give their time to it. But then there came a point where actually things were getting a little bit big. Mm-hmm. And they had to appoint people to deal with that. And it says, and their comment was, so that we may give ourselves to the word and prayer. Yeah. And then the conclusion of that episode was Acts 6. Mm-hmm. It says, and and many were made into disciples, and a number of priests became obedient to the faith. And there was it describes a period of growth. It's like the next bit of growth came. But I think you're absolutely right, Brian. I think prioritizing what you're called to do. And, I remember someone years ago saying, I'm just making up the figures slightly here, but you get the principle. 80% of your time to your strengths, 15% of your time to developing new strengths, and 5% of your time to things that you're weak at. Mm-hmm. And sometimes in our calendars, it can flip the opposite way around, where we're spending 80% of our time trying to figure out things we're not actually the best at, doing the admin, or I'm not. And for some people, that is their calling, but for me, that's not. But we've got to flip it so that our time gives the largest part to the very thing that we're called to do. And not everyone's got the luxury of doing that. But if you can shift your life towards that on that trajectory, it's a journey, isn't it? You go from being a generalist to being a specialist, and certainly that was my journey in church planting. But I think it's a good journey to go in life, that you become more and more closer to who you believe God's wired you to be, and that's where the sweet spot is and where the fruit is.
Praise God. All right, everybody. If you've got questions, you can email us, brianandpetepodcast@gmail.com. Otherwise, we will talk to you soon.
Yep. Thanks for the question, and thanks everyone for listening. Brian, great to chat.
We hope that you enjoyed today's episode of the Brian and Pete podcast. If you found this episode helpful, share with a friend, and be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss an episode. Brian is the pastor of Rehope Church, a multi-site church that started in Glasgow. He is also the founder of Scotland Bible School, a 3-year Bible school where students study every book of the Bible. Pete is the pastor of City on a Hill, a multi-site church across Edinburgh and the Lothians. He also leads Go Global, a family of hundreds of churches spanning 17 countries. If you'd like to submit a question to Brian and Pete, please email brianandpetepodcast@gmail.com. We look forward to having you join us for next week's episode.